Honored to be here. Thank you to Till for inviting me to come. I lived in Berlin one summer in 1976. This was when the wall was still up, of course, and it was a very memorable experience for me. I've been back only once since then, so it's a real pleasure to get to make this trip. You see my title on the screen. Normally we argue about inequality in terms of justice and fairness. I happen to believe, with most others, that the high levels of inequality we see now are, in a deep sense, unjust and unfair. But I think we've made very little progress toward consensus by arguing in those terms, just because people have such different conceptions of what the terms mean. People on the right have a very different idea of fairness and justice from people on the left. I've found it, therefore, useful to talk about the effects of inequality in terms of the amount of waste they cause. It's my claim that the high and rising levels of inequality have made life much more difficult, not just for the poor, which I think most people believe, but also for the very wealthiest, which I think is not a commonly shared view. I'll try to persuade you that it's a view that follows logically from premises and factual evidence that virtually every reasonable person in this room accepts. I'll look forward to pushback in the discussion section if anybody feels differently. At the core of my argument is the link between context and evaluation. Context profoundly shapes every evaluation we make. Which oval is darkest? You know it's a trick, so you'll say they're all the same. They are all the same, but which oval looks darkest? If you think the one on the left doesn't look darkest, you should schedule an appointment with your neurologist. There's something going wrong in your brain if you don't think it looks. It's supposed to look darkest because of the contrast between it and the context that surrounds it. There's nothing wrong with you if you think that. It's normal to think that. We are influenced by context like that at virtually every turn. If somebody asked me growing up, is it cold out on a November evening when it's 16 degrees? I grew up in Miami. I would say, stupid question. Of course it's cold. That's a really uncomfortably cold evening. If you asked somebody who was in Stockholm on a 16-degree day in March, is it cold out? They would think you'd ask a stupid question too. Of course, it's not cold out. Look at everybody celebrating the nice warm day. So I think economists 100 years from now will look back in wonder that economists completely ignored the link between context and evaluation. According to our simple models, our evaluation of a house depends only on its absolute characteristics. Is my house okay? Well, I lived in a house something like this when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal in the mid-60s. It had 2 rooms. It had no electricity. It had no running water. When it rained hard, as it did in the summer months, the roof would leak a little. If you lived in a house like that in Ithaca, New York, where I've lived for the last 50 years, your kids wouldn't want their friends to see where they live. They would be ashamed. But in Sanastjadi, Nepal, it was an absolutely satisfactory house. I never, for one moment during the 2 years I lived in it, felt any sense that it was inadequate in any way. I was always proud to invite guests over. It was a nicer house than most of the other teachers who taught in the village school where I was teaching. If my friends in Nepal would see my house in Ithaca, they would think I had taken leave of my senses. Why would anyone need such a grand house as that? They would wonder. Why so many bathrooms? Is there a problem? They'd be puzzled. But people in Ithaca don't think there's anything strange about the house I live in. It's indeed a much more modest house than many of the houses that my colleagues live in. It's all very much context dependent. What's changed that's relevant for our topic is that the context of people's purchasing power has shifted in a dramatic way in recent decades. So if you're at the bottom of the income ladder, your incomes have grown scarcely at all. If you're in the upper echelons, your incomes have grown in a dramatic way. This is in contrast to the decades after World War II, where incomes grew at about the same rate for people at the top, middle, and bottom tiers of the income distribution. Not anymore. It's been all the gains going to people at the top. This has produced what I call a phenomenon, expenditure cascades. The people at the top have been spending more on everything, of course. Why? Because they have more money. That's what people at every income level do when they get more money. They buy more and better and bigger. They've been building bigger and more lavish houses. There's no evidence that the people in the middle are resentful of that. They seem to enjoy consuming videos and other portrayals of the possessions of the rich. The people just below the top earners are, however, influenced by them. They attend receptions and dinner parties at their friends just above them, and suddenly they feel they need a house with a ballroom so they can have their daughter's wedding reception at home instead of in a hotel or some other rented space. And so they build bigger. They've got a circle of friends that includes people in the next rung below them on the income ladder. Those people leave and feel like now we need a dining room that can seat 18, not just 12, because that's the custom increasingly in that circle. So they build bigger and so on all the way down the ladder. And without reference to that cascade, you just cannot explain the pattern of house size growth that we've seen in the US. Why is the median new house built in the US 50% larger than its counterpart from 1980? We can't explain that except that people around us are building bigger, so we build bigger. But why are people around us building bigger? Because ultimately the people at the top are building bigger, and they're building bigger because they have more money. We see this cascade in virtually every domain. So in the question of how much people spend for their daughter's wedding reception, that has grown something like threefold in inflation-adjusted dollars. Now the average expenditure is $36,000. In 1980, it was $12,000. There is absolutely no evidence that the people who are attending the more expensive wedding receptions are happier than the people who were getting married in 1980. In fact, there's one study that shows that the people who spent in the top quintile on these events were more likely, not a lot more likely, but more likely to get divorced each year in the succeeding years. So the people in the top aren't under any stress. They've got a lot more money and they're spending it. What about the people further down? How are they making do? They don't have more money than they used to, really, or at least most of them don't have significantly more. How are they making ends meet if they're building houses that are 50% bigger and spending more on other things? The answer is that they're working every conceivable margin. They're working longer hours. They're buying homes further from the center where land is cheaper, and so they endure longer commutes. Is inequality part of this picture? Two colleagues and I attempted to answer that question by looking at the 100 largest US counties over the span of several census periods, for which we were able to compare three measures of financial distress. So if this cascade is putting pressure on people in the middle, we would expect to see divorce rates go up in the counties where inequality had grown most. That's what we did in fact see. Counselors will say couples who are having difficulty have a whole variety of issues that they bring to the table, but almost every time it involves some degree of financial distress among the people they see. Long commutes, those were much more prevalent in the communities in counties where income inequality had grown the most, as were the number of bankruptcy filings. None of that proves anything, but it would be awkward for the claims I'm making if it didn't turn out that way. So let's try to unpack what any of this might mean for the amount of waste that's implied by expenditure cascades. So there's a huge literature, it's really millennia old if you go back to the earliest cogent writings, on what is it that makes people flourish. The literature's gotten more quantitative and empirical over the centuries, but we know that there are some very well identified factors that are strongly linked to higher levels of life satisfaction or flourishing. The basic data that many of the scholars in this literature use is the basic life satisfaction question that's posed by the World Happiness Report. They ask, on a 10-point scale, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? If you say 0, that means you can't imagine things being any worse than they are right now. If you say 10, you can't imagine things being any better. Most people don't say 0 or 10. They say something in the middle. And what we know is that these measures are very strongly linked to other observable indicia that are taken to be evidence of well-being in cross-human studies. So higher satisfaction levels, as measured by this instrument, are linked to, if a country's average level is higher, it has greater social support, longer healthy life expectancy, greater freedom, higher levels of generosity are prevalent, lower levels of corruption, and a variety of other. So it's probably a good thing to be happier than less happy if all else were equal, if you had a choice. Happiness is not the only goal in life. Evolution did not forge the brain to make us happy. It had something very, very different in mind. But if we could change our circumstances in a way that would make us happier at the sacrifice of nothing else we care about, I can't think of any reason why we wouldn't want to do that. So how much are we wasting? Let's look at US GDP between 2012 and 2019. It grew in 2012 from 16.4 trillion to 21.9 trillion in 2019. That's more than 5 trillion extra. And most of that growth, almost all of it, in fact, went to people at the top part of the income distribution. These were people who already had very large houses, large expensive cars, as much as most people would think of as generous amounts of everything. And what the literature on human happiness demonstrates is that beyond a point that's long since been passed in Western countries, across the board increases in consumption in many private consumption categories serve only to raise the bar that defines what people think of as adequate. So if all the mansions double in size, the people living in them aren't any happier or healthier than before. No one's shown this, but my intuition is that they would be less happy simply because the larger mansions are a lot more trouble to take care of. Well, if all that is true, and I'd love to hear counter arguments, my claim is that means that we have poured $5 trillion down the toilet. We got $5 trillion extra dollars and we didn't get anything back from it. Are there other things we could have spent those $5 trillion on? I'll come back to that question, but you won't be surprised to learn that I think the answer is clearly yes. Okay. The fact that context shapes reward leads to what I call positional arms races. Everybody stands up to see better. Nobody sees any better than if everybody had remained comfortably seated. When payoff depends on rank, we all try to increase our position, and yet when we all invest in performance enhancement, there's still only 10% in the top 10%. So it would be strange if that's a fundamental fact of human existence, that the existence of human civilization over millennia would be such that we had never figured out ways to curb any of that waste. We've been making collective agreements for thousands of years. We ought to have stumbled on strategies that help. I'll just mention a few that will be familiar to you. In the US, we have mandatory kindergarten start dates. If your child turns 5 years old by the 1st of October in many places, he's got to start kindergarten that year. Why don't we leave that up to the individual parents to decide when to start their kids? Well, if I hold my kid back for a year, he'll be bigger, smarter, stronger, more socially skilled, and more equipped in every way than if he had started with his age peers. He will do better, since school is always graded on the curve. He will do better in the first grade, second grade, all the way through school, be more likely to get into Harvard or Caltech or wherever parents hope to send him. And so everybody would match that move of keeping the kid back a year, and then we'd have 6-year-old kindergartners, then 7-year-old. I don't know where it would stop, maybe before teenage years, but what a waste that would be if everybody started kindergarten at age 13. We would have that outcome, but for the fact that we have a rule that says you have to start when you're 5. Auto racing associations have limits on engine displacement and how much you can spend on tires. Imagine what would happen if there weren't those limits. The engines would get bigger and bigger. They'd spend more and more on tires. There would still be only one winner. There would still be a driver with more skills who would be most likely to be that winner. Why not limit all those things that are costly in a variety of ways and yet don't serve anything to enhance the... Why is it, this is a question due to one of my economic heroes, Tom Schiller, why is it that hockey players vote in secret ballots for helmet rules even though they don't wear helmets whenever there isn't a rule? If helmets are so great, Schilling asked, why don't you just wear them? Why do you need a rule? His answer I found persuasive. If you take your helmet off, you can see better, you can hear better, you can intimidate rival players more effectively, maybe, and so you gain an edge. But their best response to your move is to take their own helmets off, and then both sides skate without helmets. Both sides have greater risk of injury or death. Why not skate with all of us wearing helmets? Still, half the teams will win their games and half will lose. We know that's what's necessary is to have a rule. A nudge won't do the job. If you just post a sign in the locker room, caution, skating without a helmet could lead to serious injury. That won't have any effect at all. We have to have a requirement because the competitive pressure is so great. Workplace safety standards. The conservative free marketeers say we rob workers of their freedom when we force them to buy government-mandated levels of safety. What if I don't care about safety? Shouldn't I be free to buy whatever? Well, that sounds good, but if I'm a worker and I face a choice between a risky job at a high wage and a safer job at a low wage, obviously that's the choice I will face since safety costs money. I'd be very tempted to take the risky job, even though I don't want to face the extra risk, because being in a higher paying job would enable me to bid more effectively for a house in a good school district. Every almost every parent's first objective to send his or her kids to the best possible school. In every jurisdiction, the best schools are located in the more expensive neighborhoods, even in countries like France that take steps to assure that school budgets are the same in every area. So I'll take a risky job, I'll get the extra pay, I'll bid for a house in a better school district, and that would be great if I were the only one who did that. But as with standing to get a better view, it's a very different outcome when we all do it. We all bid for houses in better school districts. We succeed only in bidding up the prices of those houses. Still, half of all our kids go to bottom half schools, the same as before. It's the same with Social Security. The same conservatives say we rob people of their freedom by telling them how much they have to save, by forcing them to participate in mandatory government retirement programs. George Bush tried to create a privatized Social Security system. You decide how much to deposit into your retirement account, and the government can't prevent you to take money out if you think you have a more important use for it at any point along the way. And a lot of people thought, oh, what a great idea that would be. But most voters didn't think that was a good idea, and I don't think it would be a good idea because of what would inevitably happen if we adopted that. It would be a sure thing that some parents would withdraw money from those accounts to bid for houses in better school districts. What would parents do? Sit idly by and see their kids get bumped down into the lower quality schools? They would take money out too. We'd all take money out of our retirement accounts to bid for houses in better school districts. And then we'd end up with no money to live on in retirement, and the kids would go to the same schools as before. Here's what I've proposed to do about this. Spending more on positional things, bigger houses, fancy receptions, is wasteful. We would like to tax things according to how positional they are. That's just not practical. We will never have enough information to enable us to do that. And so what I propose instead is a second best instrument, which is to scrap the current progressive income tax. In its place, adopt a much more steeply progressive tax on annual consumption expenditure. That sounds scary. Oh, do I have to save all my receipts to prove how much I spent? No. All you do is you report your income to the IRS the same as you do now. You document how much you added to your savings, as people in many countries already do with tax-exempt retirement accounts. Then your income minus your savings that year, that's how much you spent during the year. And that amount minus a big standard deduction, that's what we levy your tax on. Rates start out low and they stay low until you get up to high levels of consumption. And what's really different is that here we can have very high rates once we get up into consumption levels of $1 million a year, $2, $3, $4 million a year. We couldn't have high tax rates on income at those levels for fear of choking off savings and investment. But with a progressive consumption tax, higher marginal tax rates on the top levels of consumption would actually encourage greater savings and investment. So what would the effect of this be? Here's a thought experiment I'll ask you to follow along. We've got the current world where the wealthy, who don't pay much in tax, drive Ferrari F12 Berlinetters, 333,000 euro cars. In the world with a steeply progressive consumption tax, the wealthy couldn't afford to buy those cars. They would be forced to make do with the lowly Porsche 911 Turbo, only $150,000. So if everything else were the same in the two worlds, in which world would the wealthiest drivers be happier? We don't know. Nobody's done the experiment, obviously. But I think we can state reasonably confidently that it would be hard to determine any difference in happiness levels between the two drivers because, after all, the Porsche has every design feature built into it that affects handling and performance and other things drivers care about. If it's a worse car, and some motor buffs argue that it's an even better car despite being cheaper, but if it's a worse car, it's not worse by much. And since these are two separate worlds, drivers in each one would know they were driving the best car out there, which is a lot of what gives them the pleasure they take. So it wouldn't matter that the rich were driving cars that cost less than half as much. But the two worlds, in fact, wouldn't be the same. So now let me ask you to imagine that you have the most hostile view of government of any in the room. Government is extremely wasteful. Okay, they build bridges to nowhere. They have bribes that they circulate. There's a lot of corruption. Look at any government budget. Most of the items in the budget are for things that voters like, schools, roads, and the like. So what the real question is, who is happier? Somebody who drives a 300,000 euro Ferrari in a country that has poorly maintained roads, or somebody who drives the Porsche in a country that has well-maintained roads? What an uninteresting question that even is. No serious driver would even hesitate for an instant before answering that question. The bottom line, for me, of this thought experiment is that the higher taxes on the rich don't hurt the rich at all. And in fact, by financing public goods that are now underfinanced, they actually help the rich. Is it politically feasible to do this? I've been arguing for it for 50 years. They haven't done it yet, so I have a hard time making the case that it's politically feasible, although the conservative icon Milton Friedman recommended exactly this tax during World War II as the most efficient way to raise a lot of revenue if we needed a lot of revenue. Do we need a lot of revenue now? It's going to cost us $5 trillion to make a reasonable attempt to mitigate the climate crisis that we're in the midst of. That $5 trillion is a pittance, actually. It's no different. If we look at the US income growth trajectory, we had a growth stoppage in the financial crisis, so we missed 3 years of growth. That means our current income trajectory is about $5 trillion a year lower than it would have been if we'd continued without that interruption. Are we managing? We're managing fine. The things are working without difficulty. So it's really not an issue. We can pay for mitigation of the climate crisis. There's plenty of dollars sitting there being wasted now. Have I got? Oh, okay, I'm going to do the quick rush through. This will not take the 2 minutes I've been allotted to finish my remarks. If higher taxes to pay for public investment, whose value to the wealthy would exceed their loss from the corresponding decline in private consumption, why don't they vote accordingly? This is the equivalent of the "if I'm so smart, how come I'm not rich" question. Yeah, I've been recommending this. Why don't people vote for politicians who will do it if I'm so smart and this is such a good idea? I think it's because people suffer from a major cognitive illusion. I'll say a little bit about cognitive illusions. Which square is darker, A or B, or which square looks darker? You have to say A. I won't even give you time to think about it because we don't have time. But I was astonished to learn that they're the same shade of gray. I thought that actually can't be. It was a plausible argument because square B lies in shadow, and we know things in shadow are actually don't have the same shade as they appear to have. We make an implicit correction. Okay, it wasn't until I made a strip joining the two squares that I was able even to believe that the two squares were the same shade of gray. And I show you these two examples just to illustrate that you can believe something can't be true, and yet it is true. People at the top believe that if they have higher taxes, they won't be able to buy what they want. That's what they believe. That seems obviously true to them, but it's false. How come they believe it if it's false? The standard way to think about how an event will affect you is to think of how events like that affected you when they happened before. So how did I feel the last time my taxes went up if I'm a wealthy guy? Well, that doesn't work in the current environment because the top rates have been going down ever since World War II, at least in the US. The same's been happening elsewhere. 70%, when I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1966, they're now down to 37%. Hardly any tiny increases in the meantime, so you can't use that heuristic. The next heuristic is, how did I feel the last time I had less money? I know that if I am taxed more heavily, I'll have less money. So if I have less money, how did I feel? I'll think back to the times when I actually had less money. How did I feel then? Well, I had a bad business year. I remember that. I felt horrible. I had a divorce. I had less money then too. I felt horrible then as well. I had a house fire. I had a health crisis. All those things, I felt horrible. And all those times were times when I had less money. But each of those times were ones when I had less money, but my peers had the same amount of money as before. That's different from a tax increase on the high earners. That means we all have less money. And it comes to bidding for the luxuries we want. Everybody wants a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. If you're a wealthy person in New York, that's on your wish list. How do you get it? You have to outbid other wealthy people who want it. If your taxes go up and their taxes go up, the same apartments end up in the same hands as before. So that's the argument. We're wasting a ton of money needlessly. If there were nothing we could do about it, fine, but there are many easy things we could do that would eliminate most of that waste.